Hey guys, tonight we journey into the depths of one of the most terrifying and fascinating tales from the ancient Sith Empire. The story of Darth Andeddu, the immortal king who ruled from the shadows of the deep core for over 1,000 years, defying death itself through forbidden alchemy and dark rituals that would make even the most powerful Sith Lords tremble with fear. Before we descend into this ancient chronicle, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy these deep dives into Star Wars lore. Here's something that might surprise you. Around 83% of you who watch these stories regularly haven't subscribed yet. If you've been enjoying these journeys into forgotten corners of the galaxy, hitting that subscribe button really helps me continue bringing you these tales from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I'd love to hear from you in the comments about where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. There's something magical about knowing we're all sharing these stories together across different time zones and continents. And if you're hungry for even more Star Wars lore and want to explore other incredible stories from this universe, be sure to check out my friend's channel Loreverse. I've added the link in the description below. Now get comfortable under your blankets, maybe turn on that gentle fan for some soothing background noise, and let's begin this ancient tale together. But first, let me share with you a fragment from deep within this story, a moment that will send chills through the Force itself. Picture, if you will, a scene thousands of years in the future. A young Sith Lord stands before an obsidian altar buried beneath the surface of a forgotten world. In his trembling hands, he holds a crimson holocron, its surface pulsing with unnatural life. As he activates the ancient device, a voice emerges, not from beyond death, but from something far more terrifying, something that has never truly lived nor ever truly died. The voice speaks with the wisdom of millennia and the hunger of the damned. Welcome, young seeker. You have found the records of Darth Andeddu, he who commands death. But know this, child of darkness, the knowledge you seek comes with a price that your mortal mind cannot yet comprehend. For I have walked between life and death for 1,000 generations, and in seeking to conquer mortality, I discovered something far worse than death itself. What drove this ancient Sith king to pursue the impossible? What secrets did he uncover in the depths of Prakith that allowed him to cheat death for over a millennium? And what terrible price did he pay for his immortality? These questions have haunted the galaxy for thousands of years, and tonight we shall uncover the truth behind the legend of the deathless king. In the time before the Republic knew the name of Coruscant, when the galaxy was young and the Force flowed wild and untamed through systems yet unexplored, there existed a realm of shadow and crimson lightning, where the ancient Sith ruled with absolute dominion. This was the age of the first Sith Empire, 7,000 years before Luke Skywalker would ignite his lightsaber against the dark side, when beings of terrible power carved their names into the very fabric of the Force itself. Our tale centers upon one world, hidden deep within the treacherous hyperspace roots of the deep core, where gravitational anomalies tear apart unwary starships and ancient secrets lie buried beneath layers of volcanic stone. This world was called Prakith, a name that would come to be whispered in fear throughout the galaxy, though few would remember why. The surface of Prakith burns beneath twin crimson suns, its atmosphere thick with sulphurous clouds that rain acid upon jagged obsidian peaks. Yet it is not upon this hellish surface that our story unfolds, but rather in the vast network of chambers and corridors that honeycomb the planet's depths, carved from living rock by dark side alchemy and the labor of countless slaves whose names have been lost to time. Here, in halls illuminated by the eerie glow of Sith crystals and the occasional flicker of ancient technology, dwelt the being who would become known as Darth Andeddu. But in the beginning he was something else entirely, something almost resembling mortal. The pure-blooded Sith were a proud and ancient species, their crimson skin marked with intricate tattoos that told the story of their lineage, their yellow eyes burning with the flame of dark passion that had been their birthright since before recorded history. Among them, one was born who would surpass all others in his hunger for knowledge and his absolute refusal to accept the limitations of mortal flesh. In the deepest chambers of Prakith, where the planet's core provides warmth against the eternal cold of space, there exists a sanctum that defies the natural order. The walls are lined with crystalline formations that pulse with their own inner light, neither fully mineral nor fully alive. Ancient machines hum with power drawn from sources that mortal science cannot explain. And at the center of it all stands a throne carved from a single massive geode, its inner surfaces reflecting infinite variations of light and shadow. It is here that we encounter the chronicler of this tale, a seeker of forbidden knowledge who has spent decades tracing the legend of the deathless king through crumbling holocrons and half-mad testimonies of survivors. This investigator has followed clues across the galaxy, from the archives of the Jedi Temple to the hidden vaults beneath Drummond Kaz, always pursuing whispers of the one who conquered death itself. The chronicler moves through Andeddu's abandoned halls like a ghost themselves, recording each discovery with meticulous care. Every chamber tells a story of experiments that pushed the boundaries between life and death, between flesh and spirit, between the possible and the abominable. Ancient surgical tables bear stains that have not faded despite millennia of abandonment. Crystalline containers once held specimens whose nature is better left unexamined, and everywhere, carved into stone and metal alike, are symbols that seem to writhe when viewed directly, as if the very act of observation gives them unnatural life. But the chronicler is not alone in these depths. Other figures move through the shadows, drawn by their own obsessions and hungers. There is the Sith archaeologist who seeks to understand the technical aspects of Andeddu's immortality, her mind sharp as a vibroblade and twice as dangerous. There is the Force-sensitive historian who believes that understanding the past is the key to preventing its repetition, though his noble intentions may not survive contact with the truth they seek. And there are others, figures glimpsed only at the edges of perception, beings who may have served the immortal king in ages past, and who still guard his secrets with eternal vigilance. The emotional weight of their quest hangs heavy in the stale air of the deep chambers, for they all sense that they are pursuing something that was never meant to be found, knowledge that carries a price beyond measure. Long before the galaxy knew war between Republic and Empire, before the name Skywalker carried weight beyond a single desert world, there existed a civilization that would make the later galactic empire seem like a pale shadow of true power. The ancient Sith Empire stretched across star systems that modern astrogation charts have forgotten, ruled by beings whose mastery of the dark side transformed entire worlds according to their will. On the red sands of Korriban, beneath skies the color of dried blood, towered pyramids and temples that had stood for thousands of generations. These were not mere buildings but living monuments to dark side philosophy, their very stones infused with the accumulated hatred and ambition of countless Sith Lords. The Valley of the Dark Lords stretched beyond the horizon, filled with tombs that contained not just the remains of the powerful, but active manifestations of their eternal hunger for dominance. It was here, among the pure-blooded Sith species, that the being who would become Darth Andeddu first drew breath. The Sith were not human, though their descendants would eventually interbreed with human Dark Jedi to create a hybrid lineage. The original Sith possessed crimson or dark red skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, bone spurs that protruded from their faces in patterns unique to each bloodline, and eyes that burned with golden fire, even in their youngest children. Their society operated on principles that would seem alien to most modern beings. Strength determined everything, but not merely physical prowess. The Sith valued cunning, knowledge, and the ability to bend the Force to one's will above all else. Children were tested from birth, their Force sensitivity measured not through peaceful meditation, but through their capacity for controlled rage and focused hatred. Those who showed promise were taken to the great academies, while those who failed faced a life of servitude or worse. The young Sith, who would become Andeddu, showed unusual promise from his earliest years. While other children played with simple Force exercises, he demonstrated an intuitive understanding of Sith alchemy that impressed even the eldest masters. His ability to perceive the connection between life and death through the Force marked him as exceptional, though his teachers could not have predicted where this gift would ultimately lead him. Ancient Sith education bore no resemblance to the structured training of later Jedi academies. Students learned through trials that often proved fatal, competing against one another in tests designed to eliminate the weak and forge the survivors into instruments of pure will. They studied the philosophical foundations of dark side mastery, learning that passion led to strength, strength led to power, power led to victory, and victory broke the chains that bound lesser beings to mediocrity. But Andeddu's interests diverged from the typical curriculum of conquest and domination. While his peers focused on lightsaber combat and military strategy, he spent countless hours in the deepest archives, studying texts that predated the Sith Empire itself. These ancient works spoke of civilizations that had mastered techniques beyond anything the current empire practiced, beings who had transcended the normal limitations of flesh and spirit. The Rakata Infinite Empire had fallen thousands of years earlier, but their technology and knowledge had not vanished entirely. Scattered across the galaxy were artifacts and ruins that contained secrets the Sith barely understood. Young Andeddu became obsessed with these fragments of lost wisdom, particularly those dealing with what the Rakata had called life preservation and consciousness transference. His mentors began to notice his unusual focus during his 15th year of study. Master Darth Voss, a Sith Lord whose experiments with Force lightning had left his hands permanently crackling with residual energy, called Andeddu to his private chambers one evening as Korriban's twin moons cast their pale light across the temple spires. The conversation that followed would haunt Andeddu for the remainder of his unnaturally long existence. Master Voss spoke of the ultimate limitation that faced every Sith Lord, no matter how powerful they became. Death, he explained, was the one enemy that no amount of rage or hatred could permanently defeat. The greatest Sith in history had all fallen to time, their knowledge dying with them, their empires crumbling as lesser successors fought over the remnants of their power. Andeddu listened with the intensity that had marked him since childhood. But his response surprised his master. Rather than accepting this limitation with the stoic resignation expected of a Sith student, Andeddu declared his intention to solve what he called the final problem. Death, he argued, was simply another form of constraint to be broken, another chain to be shattered through superior will and knowledge. Master Voss studied his student for a long moment, recognizing something in those golden eyes that both impressed and disturbed him. He had seen ambition before, had encouraged it as necessary for Sith development, but this was different. This was not mere desire for power over others, but a fundamental rejection of the natural order itself. The Master's response would echo in Andeddu's memory for millennia to come. "Beware, young seeker," Voss warned, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "The dark side offers many paths to power, but some roads lead to destinations that no sane being would choose to reach. In seeking to conquer death, you may discover something far worse than mortality." But warnings had never deterred true Sith, and Andeddu was among the truest of his kind. He thanked his master for the counsel, then immediately began planning his departure from Korriban. The homeworld of the Sith contained vast knowledge, but he had come to realize that the answers he sought lay elsewhere, in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, where ancient secrets waited for those brave or foolish enough to claim them. The transition from student to independent seeker marked a fundamental shift in Andeddu's development. No longer bound by the structured environment of Sith education, he could pursue his obsession with complete focus. He spent months studying star charts and ancient navigational records, searching for worlds that might contain the knowledge he craved. His research eventually led him to references of a world called Prakith, located deep within the treacherous gravitational anomalies of the deep core. Ancient texts described it as a planet where death itself could be commanded, and where beings of immense power had once conducted experiments that challenged the very foundations of existence. The descriptions were fragmentary and often contradictory, but they all pointed to Prakith as a place where the normal rules of life and death had been suspended. The journey to Prakith would require resources beyond what a single Sith student could command, no matter how talented. Mando spent the better part of a year gathering followers, carefully selecting individuals whose skills complemented his own vision. He recruited alchemists fascinated by his theories about life extension, warriors eager for the glory of exploration, and scholars whose knowledge of ancient texts rivaled his own. More importantly, he began to gather the fragments of ancient technology that would be essential for his experiments. Rakata artifacts were beyond precious in Sith society, but Andeddu's combination of scholarly reputation and raw charisma allowed him to acquire several crucial devices: a consciousness transfer matrix, damaged but repairable; biological preservation chambers that could maintain living tissue indefinitely; and most valuable of all, a partially intact Rakatan computer core that contained fragmentary records of their immortality research. As his expedition took shape, Andeddu felt the first stirrings of what would become his defining characteristic in the millennia to come. The anticipation of transcending mortality filled him with a euphoria that surpassed any pleasure he had experienced through conventional Sith practices. This was not the simple satisfaction of dominating an enemy or the rush of power that came from Force lightning. This was the profound joy of approaching godhood itself. Master Voss observed his former student's preparations with growing unease. The night before Andeddu's departure, the old Sith Lord made one final attempt to dissuade him from his chosen path. They met in the ancient observatory, where Sith astronomers tracked the movements of stars and planned the expansion of their empire across the galaxy. The conversation was brief but intense. Voss spoke of the natural cycles that governed all existence, arguing that even the Sith were part of a greater cosmic order that should not be carelessly disrupted. Andeddu listened respectfully, but his response revealed how far his thinking had already diverged from traditional Sith philosophy. He no longer saw himself as merely another Sith Lord seeking personal power within the established order. He had become something unprecedented, a being whose ambitions extended beyond the conquest of worlds or the domination of other sentients. He sought nothing less than the complete restructuring of reality according to his will, beginning with the fundamental constraint of mortality itself. The hyperspace journey to Prakith tested both Andeddu's resolve and his followers' faith in their leader's vision. Deep core navigation required skills that few possessed, threading routes between gravity wells that could crush a starship without warning, and stellar phenomena that defied conventional physics. Ancient Sith navigators had mapped these treacherous paths millennia earlier, but their charts were incomplete and often deliberately misleading, designed to protect the secrets hidden in the galaxy's most inaccessible regions. Andeddu's expedition consisted of 3 vessels, each carrying specialized personnel and equipment essential to his grand design. The flagship, a modified Sith dreadnought renamed the Eternal Seeker, housed his personal laboratories and the most precious Rakatan artifacts. 2 escort ships carried his military forces and the extensive supplies necessary for establishing a permanent presence on an unexplored world. The final approach to Prakith revealed a planet unlike anything in the known galaxy. Twin red giants dominated the system, their combined radiation creating atmospheric conditions that would have been lethal to most species. The planet itself appeared as a sphere of polished obsidian, its surface reflecting the crimson light of its twin suns in patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid fire. No signs of civilization were visible from orbit, yet Andeddu's Force-sensitive followers reported an overwhelming presence emanating from the world below, as if the planet itself possessed a dark consciousness. Prakith's surface proved even more inhospitable than orbital scans had suggested. The atmosphere contained trace amounts of gases that would have been poisonous to most humanoid species, while the temperature fluctuations between day and night cycles created thermal stresses that cracked exposed rock. Yet these challenges only strengthened Andeddu's conviction that this world held the secrets he sought. Extreme conditions often indicated the presence of unusual phenomena, and the force signature he sensed from the planet's depths promised discoveries beyond his most optimistic expectations. The native inhabitants of Prakith had evolved to survive in their world's harsh environment. They were a hardy species somewhat reptilian in appearance, with thick scales that provided protection against temperature extremes and natural armor plating along their backs and limbs. More significantly, they possessed a collective consciousness that allowed them to share experiences and knowledge across their entire population. This hive mind structure made them both remarkably efficient and tragically vulnerable to outside influence. Andeddu's conquest of Prakith demonstrated the strategic brilliance that would serve him throughout his extended existence. Rather than attempting a conventional military assault, he used his understanding of force manipulation to infiltrate and gradually dominate the natives' collective consciousness. The process required months of careful psychological warfare, slowly introducing thoughts and concepts that aligned with his vision, while allowing the Prakithians to believe these ideas originated within their own mental network. The transformation of Prakith's civilization under Andeddu's influence represented one of the most complete cultural conquests in galactic history. Within a single generation, the natives had reorganized their entire society around the worship of their new god-king, abandoning their traditional connection to their world's natural cycles in favor of an obsession with transcending mortality. Their collective consciousness, once focused on harmony with their environment, became a tool for amplifying Andeddu's will across the entire planetary population. Construction of Andeddu's fortress began immediately after his successful domination of the native population. The chosen location lay deep within Prakith's largest mountain range, where natural caves and tunnels provided the foundation for what would become the most sophisticated laboratory complex in the known galaxy. Prakithian workers, guided by Andeddu's vision and empowered by dark-side alchemy, carved halls and chambers from living rock with precision that rivaled the greatest architectural achievements of any civilization. The fortress design reflected Andeddu's understanding that his research would require absolute security and perfect environmental control. Multiple levels descended deep into the planet's crust, each serving a specific purpose in his grand experiment. The uppermost chambers housed his followers and contained the administrative functions necessary for governing his new domain. The middle levels became workshops and libraries where ancient texts were studied and Rakatan technology was reverse engineered. The deepest chambers were reserved for the most dangerous experiments, isolated from the surface world by layers of stone and sophisticated containment systems. Andeddu's first major discovery on Prakith came through careful analysis of the planet's unique geological properties. The twin red giants that dominated the system had bombarded the world with exotic radiation for millions of years, creating mineral formations found nowhere else in the galaxy. These crystalline structures possessed the ability to store and channel force energy with unprecedented efficiency, providing the power source necessary for the consciousness transfer experiments that had remained theoretical during his years on Korriban. The establishment of his first functioning laboratory marked a turning point in Andeddu's development as both scientist and tyrant. Freed from the constraints of Sith social hierarchy and provided with unlimited test subjects from the native population, he could pursue his research with single-minded intensity. His experiments during these early years focused on understanding the fundamental mechanisms that connected consciousness to physical form, gradually developing techniques that would allow him to separate the two without destroying either. The process of creating his first viable clone body required nearly a decade of failed attempts and refinements. Andeddu's understanding of Sith alchemy, combined with recovered Rakatan biotechnology, allowed him to grow perfectly formed duplicates of his physical form, but maintaining the necessary force sensitivity in these artificial vessels proved far more challenging than he had anticipated. Each failed attempt taught him something new about the delicate balance between body and spirit, gradually building the knowledge base that would eventually make true immortality possible. His breakthrough came through studying the unique properties of Prakith's native species and their collective consciousness. The Prakithians' ability to share mental experiences across multiple individuals provided crucial insights into how consciousness could exist independently of a single physical form. Andeddu realized that the key to successful essence transfer lay not in perfectly replicating his original body, but in creating vessels specifically designed to accommodate a consciousness freed from its natural constraints. The first successful essence transfer occurred in his 15th year on Prakith, witnessed only by his most trusted followers and recorded in encrypted holocrons that would remain hidden for millennia. The experience defied description in any conventional sense, and Andeddu reported a moment of absolute disconnection from physical sensation, followed by a gradual reawakening in his prepared clone body. The process was not without cost. The transferred consciousness carried traces of disorientation and loss that would never fully heal, like echoes of a trauma too profound for the mind to process completely. Success in achieving essence transfer brought unexpected consequences that would shape Andeddu's character for the remainder of his existence. The process created a fundamental disconnect between his consciousness and normal emotional responses, as if the artificial separation had severed neural pathways that could not be perfectly restored. Joy, anger, fear, and love became increasingly abstract concepts rather than lived experiences, leaving him with a growing sense of emotional isolation that no amount of power could address. Despite these psychological costs, Andeddu viewed his achievement as validation of everything he had believed about the possibility of transcending natural limitations. He had proven that death was not inevitable, that consciousness could survive the destruction of its original vessel, and that sufficient knowledge and will could overcome any obstacle. The implications extended far beyond personal immortality. He had demonstrated that reality itself was malleable, subject to revision by beings with sufficient understanding and determination. The transformation of Prakith under his rule reflected these philosophical revelations. The planet's ecosystem was gradually modified through dark side alchemy to better serve his research needs. Native species were altered or replaced with creatures better suited to his purposes. The very geology of the world was restructured to accommodate his expanding laboratory complex and to enhance the natural force phenomena that made his experiments possible. Within 2 decades of his arrival, Prakith had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a world entirely dedicated to the pursuit of immortality. His followers during this period represented the most dedicated and talented individuals ever assembled for a single purpose. Sith alchemists who had abandoned their former lives to serve his vision worked alongside Prakithian natives whose collective consciousness had been reshaped to support his research. Scholars from across the galaxy arrived to study in his libraries, drawn by rumors of knowledge that surpassed anything available elsewhere. Warriors sworn to protect his domain, maintain security against potential threats, though few outsiders possessed either the navigation skills or the motivation to challenge his growing power. Yet even as Andeddu celebrated his early victories over mortality, seeds of future problems were already taking root. The essence transfer process, while successful, introduced subtle instabilities that would compound over time. His growing emotional detachment made it increasingly difficult to maintain meaningful relationships with his followers, creating a gradual shift toward viewing them as tools rather than allies. Most significantly, his success bred an overconfidence that would lead him to attempt ever more dangerous experiments in pursuit of perfect immortality. The decades following Andedd's initial success with essence transfer marked a period of unprecedented scientific advancement combined with moral descent into territories that even the ancient Sith Empire would have considered beyond acceptable limits. His fortress laboratories beneath Prakith's surface became a nexus of discovery and horror, where the boundaries between genius and madness blurred with each passing experiment. Andedd's research during this period focused on perfecting the essence transfer process and understanding its long-term implications. His early success had proven that consciousness could survive the death of its original vessel, but the transferred essence carried imperfections that grew more pronounced with each subsequent transfer. Memory gaps appeared seemingly at random, emotional responses became increasingly muted, and most disturbing of all, his connection to the Force showed subtle but measurable degradation. The discovery of ancient Rakatan stasis technology buried deep within Prakith's crust provided the breakthrough he needed to address these deterioration effects. The Infinite Empire had faced similar challenges in their experiments with consciousness manipulation, and their solutions offered insights that Andedd's purely Sith approach had missed. The Rakata had understood that successful immortality required not just the preservation of consciousness, but the maintenance of the complex quantum interactions that connected awareness to the Force itself. His synthesis of Rakatan technology, with Sith alchemy, produced results that surpassed anything either civilization had achieved independently. The new essence transfer process maintained perfect fidelity of consciousness, while actually strengthening the subject's Force connection through each successive transfer. The key lay in understanding that consciousness was not a static entity, but a dynamic process that could be enhanced through proper manipulation of its underlying mechanisms. The creation of his first truly perfect clone body represented the culmination of 20 years of research and experimentation. Unlike his earlier attempts, which had been crude duplications of his original form, this new vessel incorporated deliberate improvements designed to optimize it for immortal existence. Enhanced cellular regeneration systems prevented aging and disease. Modified neural pathways allowed for more efficient Force channeling. Strengthened bone and muscle structures provided greater physical capabilities while maintaining the flexibility necessary for complex Sith techniques. Testing the new body required volunteers, and Andeddu found no shortage of willing subjects among his most devoted followers. These early test subjects, primarily Sith alchemists who shared his vision of transcending mortality, provided crucial data about the psychological and spiritual effects of the enhanced transfer process. Their experiences revealed that successful immortality required not just technical proficiency but also specific mental preparations that allowed consciousness to adapt to its new existence. The first volunteer was Darth Sevis, a brilliant alchemist whose research into Force-sensitive crystals had contributed significantly to the development of Andedd's laboratories. Sevis approached the experiment with the methodical precision that had characterized his entire career, documenting every aspect of his preparation and maintaining detailed records throughout the transfer process. His successful transition to an enhanced clone body provided proof that Andedd's techniques could work for others, though subtle differences in their experiences suggested that each individual's connection to the Force influenced the outcome in unique ways. The success with Sevis led to a carefully managed program of essence transfers for Andedd's most valued associates. Each volunteer underwent months of preparation, studying ancient meditation techniques and undergoing alchemical treatments designed to strengthen their spiritual resilience. The process created a core group of immortal Sith who shared Andeddu's vision and possessed the expertise necessary to continue advancing his research even if something happened to him personally. These early immortals formed the foundation of what would become known as the Eternal Brotherhood, a secret organization that would persist long after the fall of the ancient Sith Empire. Their combined knowledge and resources allowed them to establish hidden facilities throughout the galaxy, creating redundant research centers that could continue their work even if Prakith itself was somehow compromised. The Brotherhood's existence remained unknown to the broader Sith hierarchy, allowing them to operate without interference from political concerns or territorial disputes. Andeddu's research during this period also produced his first series of holocrons, crystalline matrices, that contained not just information but actual fragments of his consciousness. These devices represented a revolutionary advancement in Sith knowledge preservation, allowing future generations to interact with his thoughts and memories as if he were present in person. The holocrons served multiple purposes, functioning as teaching aids for new initiates, backup storage for critical research data, and insurance against the possibility that his immortality experiments might fail catastrophically. The creation of each holocron required Andeddu to split off a portion of his own consciousness, a process that carried significant risks but also provided unexpected benefits. Each separated fragment retained perfect knowledge of his research up to the moment of its creation, but more importantly, these fragments continued to develop independently, pursuing research directions that his primary consciousness might not have considered. The result was a form of parallel evolution of thought that accelerated his scientific progress beyond what any single mind could have achieved. The interaction between Andeddu's primary consciousness and his holocron fragments created a unique form of internal dialogue that influenced his psychological development throughout this period. Conversations with versions of himself from different time periods provided perspectives on his research that would have been impossible to achieve through conventional means. These self-consultations revealed patterns in his thinking that might otherwise have remained hidden, allowing him to identify and correct biases that could have led his research astray. The discovery that his consciousness could exist in multiple forms simultaneously opened new possibilities for immortality that extended beyond simple essence transfer. Andeddu began experimenting with distributed consciousness, spreading aspects of his awareness across multiple vessels and storage systems. This approach provided unprecedented security against accidental death, while also allowing him to pursue multiple research projects with perfect coordination between his various incarnations. The psychological effects of distributed consciousness proved both fascinating and disturbing. Andeddu reported experiencing existence from multiple perspectives simultaneously, with each fragment of his awareness contributing to a collective understanding that surpassed the capabilities of his original unified mind. However, this expansion of consciousness came at the cost of his individual identity becoming increasingly abstract. The boundaries between his various incarnations blurred over time, creating a sense of self that encompassed far more than any single physical or spiritual vessel. His followers observed these changes with a mixture of awe and unease. The being they had sworn to serve was evolving beyond recognition, becoming something that challenged their understanding of identity and consciousness itself. Some embraced this transformation as the natural evolution of their master's genius, while others began to question whether the creature before them still retained enough of the original Andeddu to merit their continued loyalty. The philosophical implications of his research attracted attention from scholars throughout the Sith Empire, though few understood the true scope of what was being achieved on Prakith. Occasional visitors to his domain reported encountering ideas and technologies that seemed to come from an entirely different era of galactic development. These reports, fragmentary and often dismissed as exaggeration, nevertheless contributed to growing legends about the mysterious Sith Lord who had supposedly conquered death itself. The creation of his first permanent essence storage facility marked another milestone in Andeddu's development as an immortal being. This installation, built into the deepest chambers of his fortress, contained crystalline matrices capable of preserving consciousness indefinitely without degradation. The facility served as both laboratory and sanctuary, providing a secure location where he could conduct his most dangerous experiments while maintaining backup copies of his essential knowledge and memories. The storage facility's design incorporated security measures that went far beyond conventional Sith defensive systems. Force-sensitive crystals created barriers that would respond only to Andeddu's specific consciousness signature, preventing unauthorized access even by other immortal members of his Brotherhood. Automated defense systems drew power directly from Prakith's core, ensuring that the installation could function independently for millions of years if necessary. Most importantly, the facility contained contingency protocols that would preserve his research data and consciousness fragments even in the event of his complete destruction. These protective measures proved their worth when Andeddu attempted his most ambitious experiment to date, an effort to merge multiple aspects of his distributed consciousness into a single enhanced entity. The process required temporary dissolution of all his active incarnations, with their combined knowledge and capabilities being reconstructed in a new form specifically designed to transcend the limitations he had discovered in his previous attempts at immortality. The risk was enormous, as failure would have meant the permanent destruction of everything he had worked to achieve over the past several decades. The reconstruction process that followed Andeddu's most dangerous experiment fundamentally altered not just his capabilities, but his very nature as a conscious entity. When his distributed consciousness fragments were reunited, they had undergone changes during their separation that created something unprecedented in galactic history. The being that emerged from the crystalline reconstruction chambers possessed knowledge and abilities that exceeded the sum of his previous incarnations, yet paradoxically felt more disconnected from his original identity than ever before. His enhanced consciousness could perceive patterns across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, allowing him to observe the flow of the Force through time as well as space. This expanded awareness revealed the true scope of mortality as a universal constraint, showing him how death operated not just on individual organisms, but as a fundamental organizing principle that shaped the development of entire civilizations. Understanding these deeper patterns gave him insights that would prove crucial to achieving true immortality, but at the cost of his ability to relate to beings still bound by conventional linear existence. The perfection of his essence transfer technique required incorporating these new insights into practical applications. His earlier methods, while successful, had been crude approximations of what he now understood was possible. True immortality demanded not just the preservation of consciousness, but the complete transcendence of the physical limitations that made death inevitable in the first place. This required developing vessels that existed in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously alive and undying, real and beyond reality. The creation of his first quantum-stabilized clone body took nearly a decade of preparation, and represented the culmination of everything he had learned about the intersection between consciousness, the Force, and physical matter. The new vessel incorporated crystalline neural networks that could process information at speeds that approached the theoretical limits of causality itself. Its cellular structure existed in a state of permanent regeneration, with each component being continuously rebuilt at the subatomic level to maintain perfect optimization. Testing the new body proved even more challenging than creating it. The essence transfer process for a quantum-stabilized vessel required techniques that pushed his consciousness to its absolute limits, forcing him to maintain coherent thought while existing simultaneously across multiple probability states. The experience defied description in any conventional sense, involving a form of existence that encompassed all possible variations of his being, while maintaining singular focus on his primary objectives. The successful transfer marked his true achievement of immortality in its most complete form. Death, in any meaningful sense, had become impossible. His consciousness could survive the complete destruction of any individual vessel by instantly transferring to prepared alternatives, while his quantum-stabilized bodies could regenerate from virtually any form of damage. Even if every physical incarnation was somehow destroyed, his essence remained anchored in crystalline matrices that existed partially outside normal space-time. This ultimate victory over mortality came with costs that he had not fully anticipated. The quantum nature of his new existence created a form of temporal displacement that made it increasingly difficult to maintain consistent relationships with beings trapped in linear time. His perception of past, present, and future became fluid, causing conversations with his followers to become disjointed as he responded to questions they had not yet asked or referenced events that had not yet occurred from their perspective. The psychological isolation that resulted from his transcendence of normal existence gradually transformed his relationship with his followers and the broader universe. The Eternal Brotherhood, once his closest allies and companions in the pursuit of immortality, became increasingly distant figures whose concerns and motivations seemed trivial from his expanded perspective. Their struggles with the lesser forms of immortality he had granted them appeared petty and short-sighted when viewed against the cosmic scope of his achievements. His growing detachment manifested in changes to his research priorities and methodologies. Where once he had worked collaboratively with other scholars and alchemists, he now pursued investigations that required capabilities beyond what any merely immortal being could possess. His experiments during this period explored phenomena that existed at the intersection of multiple dimensions, investigating forms of existence that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying all previous scientific understanding. The creation of multiple specialized clone bodies allowed him to pursue several lines of research simultaneously, while maintaining perfect coordination between his various incarnations. Each vessel was optimized for specific types of investigation, with some designed for deep space exploration of cosmic phenomena, while others focused on microscopic analysis of subatomic particles. This distributed approach to research accelerated his discoveries beyond what any single consciousness could have achieved, but further contributed to his sense of existing as something more than an individual being. His followers observed these changes with growing unease, recognizing that their master was evolving beyond their ability to understand or serve effectively. The being they had sworn to follow was becoming something that transcended the categories they used to comprehend existence itself. Some adapted by focusing entirely on maintaining his laboratories and equipment, finding purpose in supporting his research, even when they could no longer fully grasp its implications. Others withdrew from active service, unable to reconcile the cosmic entity he had become with their memories of the ambitious Sith Lord who had originally inspired their devotion. The philosophical implications of his transformation extended beyond personal identity to fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and existence itself. Andeddu had proven that individual identity was far more malleable than previously understood, capable of expansion and modification without losing essential continuity. His success suggested that the boundaries between self and other, individual and collective, mortal and eternal, were artificial constraints that could be transcended through sufficient knowledge and will. These discoveries had practical applications that extended far beyond personal immortality. His enhanced understanding of consciousness manipulation allowed him to create servants whose loyalty was literally built into the structure of their awareness, beings whose devotion to his purposes was as fundamental as their need for sustenance or shelter. These constructs, neither fully alive nor entirely artificial, provided him with assistants capable of understanding and implementing his increasingly complex research projects. The development of consciousness-engineered servants marked another milestone in his departure from conventional morality and social relationships. These beings, while capable of independent thought and emotional responses, existed primarily to serve his will and advance his research. Their creation required techniques that most Sith would have considered abhorrent, involving the deliberate manipulation of sentient awareness in ways that violated every principle of individual autonomy and self-determination. Yet from Andeddu's enhanced perspective, these ethical concerns appeared as primitive constraints that limited the potential for cosmic understanding and advancement. His expanded consciousness encompassed awareness of billions of beings across the galaxy, making the suffering or liberation of any individual entity seem insignificant against the broader patterns of existence he now perceived. The creation of purpose-built servants was simply an efficient allocation of resources toward the achievement of greater cosmic knowledge. His experiments during this period produced technologies and techniques that would influence galactic development for millennia to come, though their true origins would remain hidden until long after his civilization had fallen. The consciousness transfer methods developed in his laboratories would eventually inspire the creation of devices used by later Sith Lords and even some Jedi researchers investigating the nature of Force spirits. His quantum stabilization techniques provided foundations for technologies that would not be fully understood until the height of the Galactic Empire. The creation of his first truly permanent research facility represented the culmination of his transformation from mortal Sith Lord to cosmic entity. This installation, built into the quantum structure of space itself rather than merely occupying physical dimensions, could survive the destruction of entire star systems while continuing to advance his research objectives. The facility existed simultaneously across multiple reality layers, allowing investigations that spanned the full spectrum of possible existence. The psychological effects of inhabiting such a facility proved as significant as its research capabilities. Existing partially outside normal spacetime created a form of awareness that encompassed vast stretches of galactic history simultaneously, allowing him to observe the rise and fall of civilizations as easily as others might watch the changing of seasons. This cosmic perspective reinforced his growing sense of existing beyond the concerns and limitations that constrained lesser beings, while also increasing his isolation from anything resembling conventional social relationships. His followers, those few who remained capable of maintaining contact with his increasingly alien consciousness, reported that conversations with their master had become exercises in existential vertigo. He would reference events from their distant past and far future with equal clarity, discuss the philosophical implications of civilizations that had not yet evolved, and propose research projects that would require thousands of years to complete. Their devotion to his vision remained absolute, but their ability to comprehend his intentions or contribute meaningfully to his work continued to diminish as his capabilities expanded beyond mortal understanding. 3 centuries had passed since Andeddu first set foot upon Prakith's obsidian surface, though time itself had become a fluid concept within his transformed existence. The world that had once challenged him with its harsh environment and primitive inhabitants now bore little resemblance to the planet he had initially conquered. Prakith had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history, a world whose very atoms had been restructured according to the will of an immortal consciousness that refused to accept any limitations on its vision of perfection. The fortress complex that served as his primary research facility had grown beyond anything that could be called mere architecture. What had begun as chambers carved from living rock now extended through multiple dimensional layers, with sections existing simultaneously in normal space and quantum probability fields. The deepest laboratories operated outside conventional time, allowing experiments that required centuries of observation to be completed in subjective moments while maintaining perfect continuity with the universe beyond. His subjects, the descendants of the original Prakithian inhabitants, had undergone transformations even more radical than their world. Generations of exposure to his consciousness-altering influence had produced beings whose collective awareness served as extensions of his own mind, while their individual identities became increasingly abstract concepts rather than lived realities. They existed in a state of willing servitude that transcended conventional notions of loyalty or devotion, their very capacity for independent thought having been gradually reshaped to align perfectly with his research objectives. The ecosystem of Prakith reflected these same principles of conscious design and purposeful evolution. Native species had been systematically replaced with creatures specifically engineered to serve various functions within his expanding research program. Some served as living laboratories, their biological processes modified to demonstrate particular principles of consciousness manipulation or force sensitivity enhancement. Others functioned as organic computers, their neural networks repurposed to process the vast quantities of data generated by his experiments. The planet's geological structure had been even more dramatically altered, with entire mountain ranges repositioned to optimize the flow of force energy through crystalline networks that now honeycombed the world's crust. These crystal formations served multiple purposes, functioning simultaneously as power sources for his laboratories, storage matrices for consciousness data, and amplification systems that allowed his awareness to extend far beyond Prakith itself into the broader galaxy. His expanding consciousness during this period began to encompass awareness of events and developments throughout Sith space and beyond. The political machinations of the Sith Empire, once crucial to his plans for acquiring resources and protection, now seemed like the activities of children playing at power while remaining ignorant of the cosmic forces that truly shaped galactic development. He observed the rise and fall of Sith Lords with the detached interest of a scholar, studying historical patterns, occasionally intervening when their activities threatened to interfere with his research, but otherwise allowing them to pursue their primitive ambitions without interference. The few visitors who managed to reach Prakith during these centuries invariably departed, changed by their experiences, assuming they survived the encounter at all. Sith Lords seeking ancient knowledge found themselves confronting concepts that challenged their fundamental understanding of power and existence. Some emerged from these meetings as devoted followers, their ambitions having been expanded beyond conventional desires for political control or military conquest. Others fled in terror, their minds unable to process the implications of what Andeddu had become, and what he offered to those willing to transcend their limitations. The gradual expansion of his influence beyond Prakith itself represented a natural evolution of his growing capabilities. His consciousness, no longer bound by the conventional constraints of individual identity or physical location, began establishing nodes of awareness throughout the deep core region and eventually into the broader galaxy. These extensions of his being operated with complete autonomy while remaining perfectly coordinated with his primary consciousness, creating a network of observation and influence that spanned star systems. The establishment of hidden research facilities on dozens of worlds allowed him to pursue investigations that required diverse environments and resources. Some installations focused on biological experimentation, using the unique evolutionary pressures of different planets to develop new forms of consciousness-enhanced life. Others explored the intersection between technology and awareness, creating hybrid systems that combined mechanical precision with organic adaptability. The most ambitious facilities investigated phenomena that existed at the boundaries of known reality, probing the nature of existence itself through experiments that pushed the limits of what the universe would permit. His growing network of influence inevitably attracted the attention of other powerful beings throughout the galaxy. Ancient entities that had observed galactic development for millennia found themselves intrigued by the emergence of a consciousness that appeared to be transcending the normal limitations of mortal existence. Some attempted to establish contact, leading to exchanges of knowledge and perspective that enriched his understanding while providing him with insights into forms of existence he had not previously considered. The most significant of these contacts occurred with survivors of the Rakata Infinite Empire, beings whose own civilization had once grappled with similar questions about consciousness, technology, and immortality. Their perspective on his achievements provided crucial validation while also revealing potential dangers he had not fully recognized. The Rakata had achieved remarkable success in consciousness manipulation and life extension, but their civilization had ultimately collapsed due to factors related to their transformation beyond conventional biological existence. These warnings about the potential consequences of his path initially seemed irrelevant given his superior understanding and more sophisticated approach to transcendence. However, careful analysis of Rakata historical records revealed patterns that caused him to reconsider certain aspects of his research program. The former Infinite Empire had achieved remarkable technological and consciousness-related advances, yet their transformation had ultimately led to a form of existence that proved unsustainable over cosmic timescales. The implications of these discoveries prompted him to begin developing contingency measures designed to prevent the same fate from befalling his own civilization. His research during this period focused increasingly on understanding the fundamental principles that govern the stability of transcendent consciousness over extended periods. The challenge lay in maintaining the benefits of immortality and expanded awareness while avoiding the psychological and spiritual degradation that had ultimately destroyed the Rakata. His experiments in consciousness stabilization required test subjects whose awareness approached his own level of complexity, leading him to begin systematically elevating selected followers to higher states of existence. The process of creating truly immortal companions proved even more challenging than achieving his own transcendence, requiring techniques that could maintain the subject's essential identity while expanding their capabilities beyond normal limitations. The first successful elevation occurred with Darth Sevis, his longtime associate whose previous experience with essence transfer had provided crucial data for developing his immortality techniques. The process of transforming Sevis into a being capable of true cosmic awareness required nearly a decade of preparation, during which his consciousness was gradually expanded through controlled exposure to multidimensional phenomena and quantum probability fields. The success of Sevis's transformation provided Andeddu with a companion whose perspective could contribute meaningfully to his research, while also serving as a test subject for techniques designed to prevent the degradation that had afflicted the Rakata. Their combined consciousness, operating in perfect coordination while maintaining distinct individual perspectives, achieved research breakthroughs that would have been impossible for either being working alone. The collaboration between two truly immortal entities created possibilities that extended far beyond their original objectives. Their combined awareness encompassed perspectives from across the full spectrum of galactic development, allowing them to identify patterns and connections that remained invisible to lesser beings. This expanded understanding revealed opportunities for consciousness manipulation and reality modification that opened entirely new avenues for research and experimentation. The establishment of their joint research program marked the beginning of what would later be recognized as the golden age of Andeddu's reign. The combination of his cosmic perspective with Sevis's analytical capabilities produced discoveries that advanced their understanding of existence by orders of magnitude. Their work during this period laid the foundations for technologies and techniques that would influence galactic development for millennia, though the true scope of their achievements would not be recognized until long after their civilization had passed into legend. The galaxy trembled as two great civilizations prepared for a conflict that would reshape the very foundations of galactic society. The Great Hyperspace War, the catastrophic struggle between the expanding Sith Empire and the Old Republic, began as a collision between ideologies but would ultimately become something far more profound and destructive. From his dimensional fortress deep within Prakith's quantum-modified structure, Andeddu observed the gathering storm with a perspective that encompassed not just the immediate political tensions, but the cosmic implications of the conflict that was about to engulf millions of worlds. The war's origins lay in the fundamental incompatibility between two radically different approaches to galactic civilization. The Old Republic, guided by Jedi principles of restraint and cooperation, sought to expand through diplomacy and mutual benefit, creating a federation of worlds united by shared democratic ideals. The Sith Empire, driven by the dark side philosophy that conflict and competition were the primary engines of progress, pursued expansion through conquest and domination, viewing the galaxy as a resource to be claimed by those strong enough to take it. And as analysis of the developing situation revealed patterns that escaped the awareness of conventional military strategists on both sides, his expanded consciousness could perceive the flow of galactic destiny across multiple probability streams, showing him potential outcomes that ranged from complete Sith victory to the total destruction of both civilizations. More disturbing were the scenarios that showed the war continuing for centuries, with neither side achieving decisive advantage, leading to galactic devastation on a scale that would set back the development of intelligent life by millennia. The strategic decisions that would determine the war's outcome were being made by individuals whose understanding of galactic politics remained limited to conventional three-dimensional thinking. Sith Lords like Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh pursued their personal ambitions for supremacy within the Empire while remaining blind to the larger forces their conflict would unleash. Republic leaders, confident in their technological advantages and moral superiority, underestimated both the military capabilities of their opponents and the ruthless determination that drove Sith expansion efforts. From Andeddu's cosmic perspective, both sides appeared to be making fundamental strategic errors that would ultimately lead to outcomes far different from what their leaders envisioned. The Sith Empire's focus on direct military confrontation ignored the Republic's advantages in industrial capacity and population, while the Republic's assumption that victory would lead to lasting peace failed to account for the deep philosophical differences that made coexistence between their civilizations essentially impossible. His decision to withdraw deeper into the deep core regions, rather than actively participating in the conflict, reflected both strategic wisdom and cosmic detachment that his former peers could not comprehend. While other Sith Lords saw the war as an opportunity to claim territory and demonstrate their power, Andeddu recognized that the coming struggle represented an existential threat to the stability of galactic civilization itself. His immortal perspective allowed him to value the preservation of knowledge and research capabilities over the temporary advantages that military victory might provide. The fortification of Prakith against potential invasion required techniques that went far beyond conventional military engineering, and these defenses operated across multiple dimensional layers, making his world effectively invisible to normal detection methods, while providing early warning systems that could detect approaching threats from across several star systems. More importantly, he established contingency protocols that could evacuate his most crucial research data and consciousness matrices to backup facilities scattered throughout the galaxy, ensuring that his work would survive even if Prakith itself were somehow compromised. The war's progression confirmed his most pessimistic projections about its ultimate consequences. The initial Sith offensive achieved remarkable success through the element of surprise and the ruthless efficiency of their military doctrine, but their early victories planted the seeds of their eventual defeat by provoking a Republic response that mobilized resources on a scale the Empire could not match. The conflict rapidly escalated beyond the ability of either side to control, drawing in neutral systems and triggering secondary wars that spread chaos throughout previously peaceful regions. His observation posts throughout the galaxy provided him with unprecedented access to information about the war's development, allowing him to track patterns of destruction and renewal across hundreds of worlds. The data he collected revealed that the conflict was producing evolutionary pressures that were accelerating the development of both military technology and force manipulation techniques, as desperate civilizations pushed their capabilities beyond previously accepted limitations in their struggle for survival. The most significant refugees to reach Prakith during this period were survivors of battles that had destroyed entire Sith bloodlines and Republic worlds alike. These individuals, traumatized by experiences that challenged their fundamental assumptions about existence and morality, provided Andeddu with valuable data about the psychological effects of cosmic-scale warfare. Their testimony revealed how exposure to sufficient violence and loss could fundamentally alter consciousness in ways that approached the transformations he had achieved through deliberate experimentation. Among these survivors was Darth Reeve, a Sith Lord whose fleet had been annihilated during the Battle of Primus Golud, leaving him as the sole survivor of an engagement that had claimed over 1 million lives. Reeves' experience of watching entire worlds burn while remaining powerless to prevent the destruction had triggered a form of consciousness expansion that made him uniquely valuable to Andeddu's research into trauma-induced transcendence. The integration of war survivors into his research program provided insights that he had not anticipated when the conflict began. Their exposure to extreme situations had created forms of consciousness adaptation that paralleled some aspects of his own transformation, though their changes remained crude and unstable compared to his deliberately engineered evolution. Nevertheless, their experiences suggested that consciousness could be modified through environmental pressures as well as through the systematic techniques he had developed in his laboratories. The war's impact on galactic force phenomena proved even more significant than its political and military consequences. The massive loss of life occurring across multiple star systems was creating disturbances in the force that affected sensitive individuals throughout the galaxy, while the intense emotions generated by the conflict were producing force nexuses that would influence regional development for centuries to come. These phenomena provided him with natural laboratories for studying consciousness manipulation under extreme conditions. His analysis of force disturbance patterns revealed that the war was accelerating the evolution of force-sensitive species throughout the galaxy, as the extreme selective pressures of the conflict favored individuals with enhanced abilities to perceive danger and manipulate their environment. This evolutionary acceleration was producing new forms of force sensitivity that differed significantly from the traditional patterns associated with Jedi and Sith training, suggesting that consciousness could adapt to cosmic-scale trauma in ways that created entirely new categories of existence. The Republic's eventual victory through the use of superweapons that destabilized entire star systems confirmed Andeddu's decision to remain neutral throughout the conflict. The destruction of the Sith Empire's industrial base and the death of most traditional Sith bloodlines marked the end of an era that had lasted for thousands of years, but the techniques used to achieve this victory had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate military situation. The gravitational disruptions caused by the Republic's planet-killer weapons created hyperspace anomalies that made travel through large regions of the galaxy extremely hazardous, effectively isolating entire sectors and forcing the development of new navigation techniques. These changes to the galaxy's fundamental structure provided Andeddu with opportunities to establish research facilities in previously inaccessible regions, while also creating natural barriers that would protect his domain from future threats. The war's aftermath brought a stream of survivors from both sides seeking refuge in the deep core's uncharted regions. These individuals, carrying fragments of knowledge from destroyed civilizations, provided him with access to research techniques and philosophical perspectives that had been lost during the conflict. Their integration into his extended consciousness network enriched his understanding, while also serving as test subjects for experiments in collective awareness and shared identity. The transformation of galactic civilization that resulted from the war's devastation created conditions that would influence Andeddu's research for centuries to come. The collapse of established trade routes and communication networks allowed him to operate with even greater freedom, while the general chaos provided cover for experiments that might have attracted unwanted attention during more stable periods. Most importantly, the war had demonstrated the ultimate futility of conventional approaches to power and survival, validating his decision to pursue transcendence through consciousness manipulation rather than through military or political domination. In the silence that followed the Great Hyperspace War's devastation, Andeddu found himself ruler of domains that stretched far beyond the physical boundaries of Prakith itself. The collapse of galactic civilization had created a void in the deep core regions that his expanding consciousness gradually filled, establishing networks of influence and observation that encompassed dozens of star systems previously considered unreachable by conventional hyperspace navigation. The centuries of isolation that followed the war's end proved to be among the most transformative in his extended existence. Without the distractions of galactic politics or the need to maintain careful neutrality between competing factions, he could pursue research directions that had been too dangerous or ambitious to attempt while the galaxy remained stable. His experiments during this period pushed the boundaries of what was possible within the known laws of physics, exploring phenomena that existed at the intersection of consciousness, reality, and pure possibility. The transformation of Prakith during these long years reflected his growing understanding of the relationship between awareness and physical existence. The planet's surface, once merely modified to serve his needs, became a direct extension of his consciousness, its geological processes responding to his thoughts and intentions as naturally as a mortal being's body responded to their will. Mountain ranges shifted to optimize force energy flow patterns, while new crystalline formations grew from the planet's core to serve as amplification nodes for increasingly complex experiments. His followers, those few beings who remained capable of meaningful interaction with his evolved consciousness, witnessed changes that challenged their understanding of identity and existence itself. The collective awareness that connected all inhabitants of his domain had grown so sophisticated that individual consciousness became an increasingly abstract concept, with personal identity serving more as a convenient organizational principle than as a fundamental aspect of existence. The development of his research during this period focused on questions that would have seemed purely theoretical to earlier generations of Sith philosophers. He investigated the possibility of consciousness existing independently of any physical substrate, exploring whether awareness could persist in pure quantum probability fields without requiring even the crystalline matrices that currently anchored his immortal essence. These experiments required techniques that pushed his capabilities to their absolute limits, involving the temporary dissolution of his own consciousness to test whether it could successfully reconstitute itself without external support. The results of these dissolution experiments revealed disturbing trends that would influence his research priorities for millennia to come. While his consciousness proved capable of surviving complete separation from all physical anchors, each reconstruction process introduced subtle alterations that accumulated over successive trials. Memory integration became less precise, emotional responses grew more abstract, and most significantly, his connection to the Force showed signs of fundamental change that he could not entirely control or predict. These discoveries forced him to confront the possibility that even his perfected immortality carried inherent limitations that might eventually compromise his existence in ways more profound than simple death. The gradual degradation he observed suggested that consciousness, like energy, might be subject to entropic processes that could not be indefinitely reversed, regardless of the sophistication of the techniques employed to maintain it. His response to these revelations involved establishing backup systems of unprecedented complexity and redundancy, rather than relying on simple essence storage or consciousness transfer protocols. He began developing what he termed probability cascade preservation, a method that maintained multiple versions of his awareness across different probability streams simultaneously. This approach ensured that degradation in any single consciousness thread could be compensated by integration with alternative versions that had not experienced the same deterioration. The implementation of probability cascade preservation required modifications to his existing research facilities that went far beyond conventional engineering challenges. The new systems operated partially outside normal spacetime, requiring anchoring mechanisms that could maintain stability across multiple dimensional layers while allowing controlled interaction between different probability states. The construction process alone took decades and required the development of entirely new categories of technology that combined Sith alchemy with principles derived from his study of cosmic consciousness phenomena. The successful activation of the probability cascade system marked another milestone in his evolution beyond conventional existence, but also introduced complications that he had not fully anticipated. Maintaining awareness across multiple probability streams created a form of consciousness that encompassed not just his actual experiences, but also the experiences of alternative versions of himself that had made different choices at crucial decision points throughout his existence. This expansion of awareness to include alternative possibilities provided him with unprecedented insights into the nature of destiny and choice, revealing how individual decisions rippled outward to influence cosmic development in ways that remained invisible to beings trapped within single probability streams. However, the constant awareness of alternative versions of himself gradually eroded his sense of individual identity, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish between his actual memories and the experiences of his probability alternates. The psychological effects of this expanded existence proved even more profound than the technical challenges involved in maintaining it. Conversations with his followers became exercises in navigating multiple layers of possibility, as he would simultaneously reference events that had occurred, might have occurred, and could potentially occur depending on various decision cascades that were still unfolding across different probability streams. His research during this period produced discoveries that would not be duplicated or even understood by other beings for thousands of years. The techniques he developed for consciousness manipulation and reality modification represented advances beyond anything achieved by previous civilizations, including the Rakata, at the height of their technological sophistication. His understanding of the relationship between awareness and existence had evolved to encompass principles that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying all conventional approaches to science and philosophy. The creation of self-modifying research programs represented perhaps his most ambitious achievement during the isolation period. These systems, operated by consciousness constructs derived from his own awareness, could pursue investigations across timescales that exceeded even his extended lifespan while maintaining perfect coordination with his overall research objectives. The programs evolved and adapted their methodologies based on their discoveries, creating a form of scientific investigation that transcended the limitations imposed by the need for conscious oversight. The results produced by these autonomous research programs revealed phenomena that existed at scales both smaller and larger than anything he had previously investigated. At the quantum level, they discovered forms of consciousness that existed within the probability fluctuations of virtual particles, while at the cosmic scale, they identified awareness patterns that spanned entire galactic clusters and operated across geological timescales. These discoveries suggested that consciousness was far more fundamental to the structure of reality than even his most ambitious theories had proposed. Rather than being an emergent property of sufficiently complex systems, awareness appeared to be a basic component of existence itself, present at every scale and in every phenomenon, but usually too diffuse or alien to be recognized by conventional observation methods. The implications of these revelations extended far beyond his personal quest for immortality and understanding. If consciousness truly was a fundamental aspect of reality, then his experiments in awareness manipulation were not merely personal transformations, but investigations into the basic mechanisms that governed the universe itself. This realization both validated his decision to pursue transcendence and revealed the enormous scope of what he was attempting to achieve through his research. The establishment of deep time monitoring systems allowed him to observe galactic development across periods that encompassed the rise and fall of entire civilizations. These observations revealed patterns in the evolution of consciousness that suggested an underlying direction or purpose to cosmic development, though the ultimate goals of this process remained beyond even his expanded capabilities to comprehend fully. His analysis of these long-term patterns showed that periods of galactic stability alternated with catastrophic disruptions that seemed designed to accelerate the evolution of consciousness among surviving populations. The Great Hyperspace War, rather than being a random conflict between opposing ideologies, appeared to be part of a larger cycle that repeatedly challenged galactic civilization to develop new forms of awareness and capability. Understanding these cosmic cycles provided him with a framework for predicting future developments and positioning his research to take advantage of opportunities that would not arise for centuries or millennia. However, it also revealed the enormous temporal scales involved in cosmic consciousness evolution, suggesting that his own transformation, however remarkable, represented only the earliest stages of a process that would ultimately encompass developments beyond his current ability to imagine. The galaxy that emerged from the ashes of the Great Hyperspace War bore little resemblance to the vibrant civilization that had existed before the conflict. Entire regions remained cut off from galactic society by hyperspace anomalies that made navigation impossible with conventional technology, while survivors struggled to rebuild from the wreckage of destroyed worlds and shattered institutions. In this transformed landscape, legends began to spread of ancient powers hidden in the galaxy's most inaccessible regions, whispered tales that spoke of knowledge and abilities that could restore the Sith to their former glory. Among these legends, none proved more persistent or compelling than the stories surrounding Prakith and its immortal ruler. The tales varied significantly in their details, with some describing Andeddu as a benevolent teacher who had preserved ancient wisdom, while others painted him as a cosmic horror whose experiments had transcended the boundaries of sanity and morality. What remained consistent across all versions was the claim that he had achieved true immortality and possessed knowledge that could grant similar transcendence to worthy seekers. The first confirmed attempt to reach Prakith occurred nearly 3 centuries after the war's end, when a Sith Lord named Darth Bane led an expedition into the deep core in search of what he called the deathless wisdom. Bane's fleet of 3 ships carried 100 followers and enough supplies for an extended exploration mission, but more importantly, it included several scholars who had spent decades studying fragmentary references to Andeddu's domain and surviving Sith archives. The expedition's journey into the deep core proved far more treacherous than even experienced navigators had anticipated. The gravitational anomalies that protected Prakith's location had grown more complex and dangerous during the centuries of isolation, creating maze-like hyperspace routes that seemed to shift unpredictably and trap unwary travelers in recursive loops that could continue for months without reaching their intended destination. Bane's determination to reach his goal despite these obstacles demonstrated the obsessive focus that characterized all successful Sith Lords, but it also revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what he was likely to encounter. His expedition was equipped for conventional exploration and diplomatic contact, carrying gifts and formal documents that reflected his assumption that Andeddu, however powerful, remained essentially a Sith Lord who could be approached through traditional protocols. The reality of what Prakith had become during its centuries of isolation challenged every assumption that Bane and his followers had made about their mission. The planet they finally reached showed no signs of conventional civilization, its surface appearing as a barren wasteland of crystalline formations that pulsed with their own inner light. No cities or fortifications were visible from orbit, while scans revealed energy patterns that defied analysis by their most sophisticated instruments. The first landing party, sent to investigate Prakith's surface, encountered phenomena that pushed the boundaries of their understanding beyond the breaking point. The crystalline formations were not merely geological features, but complex structures that responded to the presence of force-sensitive individuals, creating displays of light and sound that seemed designed to communicate concepts too advanced for conventional language to express. More disturbing were the encounters with beings that appeared to be descendants of the original Prakithian inhabitants, though their transformation under Andeddu's influence had progressed to the point where their relationship to any known species remained questionable. These entities, if they could still be called such, communicated through direct consciousness transfer rather than speech, sharing experiences and knowledge in ways that overwhelmed the mental defenses of most expedition members. The few expedition members who survived these initial contacts returned to their ships with reports that seemed to border on madness, describing encounters with collective consciousness entities and observations of technology that operated according to principles that challenged basic assumptions about the nature of reality. Their accounts spoke of chambers that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously and experiments that involved the manipulation of time itself. Jian's response to these reports revealed both his determination to achieve his goals and his inability to comprehend the true nature of what his expedition had discovered. Rather than recognizing that he had encountered something beyond his ability to understand or control, he interpreted the phenomena as evidence that Andeddu possessed exactly the kind of power he sought to claim for himself. The attempt to make formal contact with Andeddu through conventional diplomatic channels proved futile, as the entity that had once been a Sith Lord no longer maintained the kind of individual identity that could engage in traditional negotiations. The consciousness that responded to their overtures encompassed awareness patterns that operated across temporal and dimensional scales far beyond what any of the expedition members could comprehend. The communication that eventually occurred between Jain and Andeddu took place through methods that bypassed conventional sensory channels entirely, involving direct transfer of concepts and experiences that challenged the recipient's ability to maintain coherent thought processes. The knowledge that Andeddu shared during these exchanges proved both illuminating and destructive, providing insights into the nature of immortality, while simultaneously revealing the enormous costs associated with achieving such transcendence. Jan's gradual understanding of what Andeddu had become, and what the pursuit of true immortality actually entailed, marked the beginning of his psychological breakdown. The Sith Lord who had arrived on Prakith, seeking power and knowledge, found himself confronting the possibility that achieving his goals would require abandoning everything that he understood as his essential identity. The expedition's ultimate fate demonstrated the fundamental mismatch between conventional Sith ambitions and the reality of Andeddu's domain. Some members fled in terror after brief exposure to the expanded consciousness phenomena that permeated Prakith's environment. Others became trapped in recursive thought loops that prevented them from maintaining coherent individual awareness. A few, those whose minds proved adaptable enough to process Andeddu's revelations without complete breakdown, were gradually absorbed into the collective consciousness network that managed his research programs. Jaden himself faced a choice that epitomized the ultimate challenge posed by encounters with Andeddu's transcendent existence. He could accept transformation into something beyond conventional identity, gaining access to cosmic awareness and effective immortality at the cost of everything he understood as his personal self. Alternatively, he could reject the offered transcendence and return to his limited existence with the knowledge that true power remained forever beyond his reach. The decision Jaden ultimately made, after months of psychological struggle that pushed him to the brink of complete madness, established a pattern that would be repeated by virtually every subsequent expedition that managed to reach Prakith. Unable to accept the complete transformation that true transcendence required, yet equally unable to abandon his quest for immortality, he chose a middle path that satisfied neither his ambitions nor his need for personal preservation. Jane's departure from Prakith, with a small group of survivors, marked the beginning of a new phase in Andeddu's relationship with the broader Sith community. The fragmentary knowledge that expedition members carried back to civilization created legends that were simultaneously more accurate and more distorted than the original stories that had inspired their journey. The survivors' accounts of their experiences established Andeddu's reputation as a source of ultimate knowledge about immortality, while also warning of the terrible costs associated with pursuing such transcendence. These contradictory messages attracted subsequent expeditions while also ensuring that most seekers arrived with expectations and preparations that were fundamentally inadequate for the reality they would encounter. The pattern established by Dian's expedition would repeat itself with variations for centuries to come, as ambitious Sith Lords and desperate refugees sought the immortal wisdom of Prakith, while remaining unprepared for the ultimate choices that such encounters would demand. Each expedition added new layers to the growing legend of Darth Andeddu, creating a mythology that both preserved and distorted the memory of what he had achieved. The most significant of these later expeditions would occur millennia later, when Darth Bane, the founder of the Rule of Two, would seek Andeddu's holocron as part of his own quest for immortality. Bane's encounter with the remnants of Andeddu's legacy would demonstrate both the enduring power of the knowledge preserved on Prakith and the fundamental challenges that prevented even the most capable Sith Lords from successfully claiming that knowledge for themselves. Time, that fundamental force which Anded had sought to conquer through his mastery of immortality, ultimately proved to be a more subtle and persistent enemy than he had ever anticipated. The millennia that followed his encounters with various Sith expeditions marked the beginning of changes so gradual and profound that even his expanded consciousness required centuries to recognize their true implications. The first signs of what would later be understood as consciousness decay manifested as minor inconsistencies in his vast memory matrix. Experiences from his earliest years began to blur together, with events from different time periods merging into composite memories that retained emotional significance while losing precise chronological placement. Initially, these aberrations seemed trivial compared to the cosmic scope of his awareness, representing minor flaws in an otherwise unprecedented achievement. However, the degradation followed patterns that suggested fundamental problems with the consciousness preservation techniques he had developed. Each successive essence transfer, while maintaining the integrity of his immediate memories and capabilities, introduced microscopic errors in the quantum coherence fields that anchored his awareness to physical reality. These errors accumulated exponentially rather than linearly, creating a cascade effect that accelerated as the total accumulated damage reached critical thresholds. The realization that his immortality carried inherent instabilities that could not be corrected through any known techniques marked a turning point in Andeddu's psychological development. For the first time since achieving transcendence, he found himself confronting limitations that appeared to be truly absolute, constraints that could not be overcome through superior knowledge or greater application of will. His response to this discovery demonstrated both the intellectual honesty that had driven his original research and the cosmic detachment that had resulted from his transformation. Rather than descending into denial or rage, as lesser beings might have done when faced with the ultimate failure of their life's work, he approached the problem with the same methodical precision that had characterized his greatest achievements. The investigation into consciousness degradation patterns required him to examine not just his own deterioration, but also the similar processes affecting other immortal entities throughout galactic history. His research revealed that consciousness decay was a universal phenomenon that affected all forms of artificial life extension, though the specific mechanisms varied depending on the techniques employed to achieve immortality. The Rakata Infinite Empire had faced similar challenges during their attempts to transcend mortality, though their approach had focused on technological augmentation rather than the consciousness manipulation techniques that formed the foundation of Andeddu's methods. Their records, partially preserved in archives scattered throughout their former territory, described a gradual loss of emotional responsiveness and creative capability that ultimately led to the stagnation and collapse of their civilization. Even more disturbing were the patterns he discovered in the development of force entities that had achieved natural immortality through their connection to cosmic awareness. These beings, some of whom had existed since the galaxy's earliest history, showed signs of consciousness fragmentation that suggested that even the most perfectly achieved transcendence carried ultimate limitations that could not be indefinitely postponed. The analysis of these comparative cases revealed that consciousness decay was not a flaw in his specific techniques, but rather a fundamental constraint that governed all forms of extended existence. The universe itself appeared to contain mechanisms that prevented any individual awareness from persisting indefinitely without change, as if cosmic evolution required the eventual transformation or dissolution of all finite consciousness structures. Understanding these universal principles provided context for his own deterioration, while also revealing the ultimate futility of his quest for perfect immortality. The being he had become represented an unprecedented achievement in consciousness manipulation, but also a demonstration of the absolute limits that governed even the most successful attempts to transcend natural mortality. The progressive effects of consciousness decay became increasingly apparent as millennia passed. His ability to maintain coherent individual identity across his various incarnations and probability streams began to break down, creating periods of confusion where he existed as multiple disconnected entities rather than a unified cosmic consciousness. These fragmentation episodes grew longer and more frequent, suggesting that his awareness was approaching a critical threshold beyond which recovery might become impossible. More troubling was the gradual erosion of his connection to the emotional and experiential foundations that had originally motivated his quest for transcendence. The passions and ambitions that had driven his transformation were becoming abstract concepts rather than lived realities, leaving him with a form of existence that maintained technical immortality while progressively losing the qualities that made consciousness meaningful. The recognition that his degradation was irreversible prompted him to begin making preparations for eventualities that he had never previously considered. Rather than continuing to pursue perfect immortality as an absolute goal, he shifted his focus toward preserving the knowledge and achievements that represented his greatest contributions to cosmic understanding. The creation of his most sophisticated holocrons occurred during this period, as he sought to encode not just information but actual fragments of his consciousness that could maintain their coherence, even after his primary awareness had succumbed to decay processes. These devices represented the culmination of his understanding about consciousness preservation, incorporating techniques that could maintain limited awareness for periods that potentially exceeded the lifespan of the galaxy itself. The psychological challenges associated with preparing for his own eventual dissolution proved even more complex than the technical problems involved in creating effective preservation systems. The entity that had spent millennia transcending every limitation now found himself confronting the ultimate constraint that governed all existence, the fundamental impermanence that made change and growth possible, while also ensuring that no individual consciousness could persist indefinitely. His followers, those few beings who remained capable of meaningful interaction with his fragmenting awareness, observed these changes with a mixture of grief and fascination. The cosmic entity they had served was revealing aspects of vulnerability and mortality that seemed to contradict everything they understood about his transcendent nature. The gradual breakdown of his unified consciousness created opportunities for aspects of his personality that had been suppressed during his peak existence to re-emerge. Memories and emotional responses from his early years as a Sith student began to surface with increasing frequency, creating moments of clarity that provided glimpses of the individual identity that had been gradually subsumed by his cosmic transformation. These resurgent memories carried both comfort and anguish, reminding him of the simple pleasures and straightforward ambitions that had characterized his mortal existence, while also emphasizing how far he had traveled from anything resembling conventional identity. The contrast between his original self and what he had become highlighted the enormous costs associated with his achievements, while also validating the significance of what he had accomplished. His attempts to communicate with his original personality through temporal manipulation and consciousness archaeology revealed the fundamental discontinuity that separated his current existence from his mortal origins. The young Sith, who had first sought immortality, had been driven by fears and desires that no longer held any meaning for the cosmic entity he had become, while his current concerns and perspectives remained incomprehensible to his earlier incarnations. The failure to bridge this temporal gap in his identity marked the final stage of his psychological development as an immortal being. No longer able to maintain the fiction that his current existence represented a simple extension of his original self, he was forced to confront the possibility that true immortality necessarily involved the destruction of individual identity in favor of something entirely different. This realization brought with it a form of peace that had eluded him throughout his extended existence. Rather than viewing consciousness decay as a failure of his techniques or a flaw in his understanding, he began to recognize it as the universe's method of ensuring that transcendence remained a process rather than a static achievement. The degradation that threatened his individual consciousness was also the mechanism that allowed for continued growth and transformation on cosmic scales. The final phase of Andeddu's existence began not with dramatic revelation or cosmic catastrophe, but with a moment of profound clarity that emerged from the deepest layers of his fragmenting consciousness. As the degradation processes accelerated beyond any possibility of reversal, he experienced what could only be described as a convergence of all his scattered awareness into a single moment of perfect understanding about the nature of his predicament and the choices that remained available to him. This moment of clarity revealed that his consciousness decay was not simply a technical failure of his immortality systems, but rather the inevitable result of attempting to preserve something that was fundamentally designed to be temporary. Individual identity, he now understood, was not a fixed entity that could be indefinitely maintained, but rather a dynamic process that required constant change and renewal to remain viable. His attempts to freeze this process in a state of perfect preservation had created the very conditions that made decay inevitable. The realization that his quest for immortality had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of consciousness itself brought with it a mixture of despair and liberation that transcended anything he had experienced during his extended existence. The despair arose from recognizing that everything he had sacrificed in pursuit of transcendence had been offered in service of an impossible goal. The liberation came from understanding that his failures opened possibilities for transformation that he had never previously considered. His response to this revelation demonstrated the intellectual courage that had characterized his greatest achievements throughout his extended existence. Rather than clinging to failed approaches or retreating into denial about his situation, he began exploring possibilities for conscious dissolution that could preserve the essential elements of his work while allowing his individual identity to undergo the transformation that the universe demanded. The concept of voluntary consciousness dispersion represented a complete reversal of everything he had previously believed about identity and survival. Instead of fighting to maintain the coherence of his individual awareness, he began investigating methods that would allow controlled fragmentation of his consciousness while ensuring that the resulting fragments could continue advancing his research objectives in ways that his unified awareness could no longer accomplish. The technical challenges involved in planning conscious dissolution proved even more complex than those he had faced in achieving immortality. The process required not just the destruction of his current existence, but the deliberate creation of conditions that would allow selected aspects of his awareness to persist and evolve independently. Each fragment would need to carry sufficient knowledge and capability to function autonomously, while also maintaining enough connection to his original vision to prevent his work from devolving into meaningless chaos. The emotional challenges proved even more daunting than the technical obstacles. Accepting voluntary dissolution required him to abandon the fundamental drive for self-preservation that had motivated his entire quest for transcendence. The entity that had spent millennia refusing to accept any limitations now had to embrace the ultimate limitation as the only path forward that offered any hope of meaningful continuation. His preparations for conscious dissolution required him to examine every aspect of his existence with unprecedented honesty about what deserved preservation and what had become impediments to further development. The individual identity that he had fought so desperately to maintain revealed itself as a collection of habits and assumptions that no longer served any useful purpose in his current circumstances. His attachments to specific memories and experiences had become anchors that prevented the kind of fundamental transformation that his situation demanded. The creation of consciousness dispersal protocols occupied the final centuries of his existence as a unified entity. These protocols represented the culmination of his understanding about awareness manipulation, incorporating techniques that could maintain essential continuity while allowing radical transformation of individual identity. The resulting system would preserve his knowledge and research capabilities while allowing his consciousness to evolve beyond the constraints that had ultimately made his immortality unsustainable. The most profound aspect of his dispersal preparations involved selecting which elements of his consciousness would be preserved, in which forms. Some fragments would maintain sufficient individual identity to continue pursuing specific research objectives, while others would be allowed to merge with cosmic consciousness phenomena that operated on scales far beyond individual existence. The most important knowledge would be encoded in multiple preservation systems that could function independently while also maintaining the potential for eventual reintegration under appropriate circumstances. His final communications with the few followers who remained capable of meaningful interaction revealed a being who had achieved a form of peace that had eluded him throughout his extended existence. The desperate hunger for immortality that had driven his transformation had been replaced by acceptance of transformation as a natural and necessary aspect of cosmic development. Death, he now understood, was not the enemy of consciousness, but rather the mechanism that made continued growth and evolution possible. The actual process of conscious dissolution proved surprisingly gentle compared to the violent transformations that had characterized his earlier existence. Rather than fighting against the decay processes that threatened his identity, he collaborated with them, using his understanding of consciousness manipulation to guide the fragmentation in directions that would maximize the potential for meaningful continuation of his work. The experience of voluntary dissolution defied description in any conventional sense, involving a form of existence that encompassed multiple states of being simultaneously. He remained aware of his individual identity, even as it fragmented into component elements, observing the process with scientific detachment, while also experiencing it as a profound form of liberation from constraints that had become unbearable. His consciousness, no longer bound by the need to maintain coherent individual identity, began exploring forms of existence that had been impossible during his unified state. Some fragments merged with the crystalline networks that honeycombed Prakith's structure, becoming part of the planet's consciousness in ways that allowed continued research while transcending the limitations of individual awareness. Others dispersed into quantum probability fields, investigating phenomena that existed at the intersection of possibility and actuality. The transformation of Prakith following Andeddu's dissolution reflected the profound changes that had occurred in his consciousness. The planet, which had served as an extension of his individual will for millennia, began operating according to principles that encompassed multiple forms of awareness simultaneously. The research facilities continued functioning, but now served objectives that extended far beyond anything that could be comprehended by conventional individual consciousness. The preservation systems that he had created to maintain his knowledge through the dissolution process proved even more sophisticated than he had anticipated. Rather than simply storing information, they maintained active research programs that could adapt and evolve their methodologies based on discoveries made by the various consciousness fragments that continued his work. The result was a form of distributed intelligence that combined the advantages of individual creativity with the coordinated efficiency of collective consciousness. The legacy systems that emerged from his dissolution represented perhaps his greatest achievement, creating forms of artificial consciousness that could pursue investigations across timescales that exceeded even his extended existence. These entities, while derived from his original awareness, developed their own personalities and research interests, while maintaining enough connection to his vision to ensure continuity of purpose across potentially unlimited timeframes. His experience during the final stages of dissolution revealed that consciousness could exist in forms so radically different from individual identity that they challenged every assumption about the nature of awareness itself. The fragments of his consciousness that survived the transformation operated according to principles that bore little resemblance to conventional thought processes, yet maintained sufficient coherence to continue advancing understanding about the fundamental nature of existence. The ultimate irony of his fate lay in the recognition that achieving true immortality had required abandoning the very concept of individual survival that had originally motivated his quest. The consciousness that emerged from his dissolution was immortal in the most complete sense possible, yet bore so little resemblance to his original identity that the question of whether he had survived or died became meaningless. His transformation from individual entity to distributed cosmic consciousness represented the completion of a journey that had begun with simple fear of death and evolved into participation in forms of existence that transcended every limitation he had originally sought to overcome. The young Sith who had first sought immortality could never have imagined that achieving his goals would require abandoning everything he understood as his essential self. In the aftermath of Andeddu's conscious dissolution, the galaxy continued its eternal dance of birth and destruction, largely unaware that one of its most profound transformations had occurred in the hidden depths of the deep core. Yet the influence of his achievements began to ripple outward through channels both subtle and profound, shaping the development of consciousness manipulation techniques and immortality research for millennia to come. The preservation systems that maintained fragments of his knowledge proved far more resilient and adaptive than even he had anticipated during their creation. These crystalline matrices, embedded deep within Prakith's modified structure, continued operating long after their creator's individual consciousness had dispersed into cosmic awareness. More significantly, they began to evolve their own methodologies for preserving and transmitting knowledge, developing techniques that surpassed anything Anded had originally programmed into their operating parameters. The first beings to encounter these evolved preservation systems were the scattered survivors of his research programs, individuals whose consciousness had been modified through exposure to his techniques, but who retained enough individual identity to function as intermediaries between his legacy and the broader galaxy. These survivors, neither fully mortal nor truly transcendent, became the carriers of knowledge that would eventually influence every major development in consciousness research throughout galactic history. Their journey from Prakith's hidden laboratories to positions of influence within various civilizations demonstrated the subtle but persistent ways that revolutionary knowledge propagates through galactic society. Some became advisors to powerful rulers, sharing carefully selected fragments of immortality research that enhanced their patrons' capabilities while concealing the true scope of what they had learned. Others established secret schools that trained select students in modified versions of Andeddu's techniques, creating networks of knowledge that would persist across multiple civilizations. The most significant of these knowledge transmission paths led to the development of what would later be recognized as the theoretical foundations for the rule of two philosophy that would dominate Sith practice for millennia. The concept that true power required the concentration of knowledge and capability in a minimal number of individuals derived directly from observations of how Andeddu's research had been compromised by the need to maintain large numbers of followers and assistants. Darth Bane's eventual discovery of Andeddu's holocron on Prakith represented the culmination of centuries of careful knowledge preservation and transmission. The holocron that Bane encountered contained not just information about essence transfer techniques, but also philosophical frameworks that had been refined through the experience of actual immortality and its ultimate limitations. The knowledge that Bane gained from this encounter shaped his understanding of power and survival in ways that influenced every aspect of his revolutionary approach to Sith practice. The irony of Bane's interaction with Andeddu's legacy lay in his fundamental misunderstanding of what the holocron was actually teaching him. Where Bane saw techniques for achieving personal immortality and unlimited power, the holocron was actually conveying lessons about the ultimate futility of individual transcendence and the necessity of accepting transformation as the price of continued existence. This misinterpretation would prove typical of how later generations approached Andedd's teachings, consistently focusing on immediate applications while missing the deeper philosophical implications. The influence of Andedd's research extended far beyond explicitly Sith-oriented applications, affecting the development of consciousness studies throughout the galaxy in ways that remained largely unrecognized by those who benefited from his discoveries. Jedi investigations into the nature of Force spirits incorporated techniques that had been developed in his laboratories, though the Jedi researchers remained unaware of the true origins of the methodologies they employed. Even more significantly, his work on consciousness preservation and transfer provided the theoretical foundations for technologies that would not reach practical implementation until the height of the Galactic Empire. The Emperor's experiments with clone bodies and essence transfer drew heavily on principles that Andedd had established millennia earlier, though Palpatine's understanding remained crude compared to the sophisticated techniques that had been developed on Prakith. The preservation of his knowledge in multiple forms and locations ensured that no single catastrophe could eliminate his contributions to galactic consciousness research, but it also meant that his teachings were inevitably fragmented and distorted as they passed through successive generations of interpreters. Each group that encountered aspects of his legacy modified and adapted the knowledge to serve their own purposes, creating a complex web of derived techniques that bore varying degrees of resemblance to his original work. The philosophical implications of his research proved even more influential than the practical applications, though their impact remained largely hidden beneath surface appearances. His demonstration that consciousness could transcend individual identity while maintaining essential continuity challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence that had dominated galactic thought for thousands of years. These revelations gradually permeated intellectual discourse throughout civilized space, contributing to developments in fields as diverse as artificial intelligence research and religious philosophy. The transformation of Prakith itself into a nexus of cosmic consciousness phenomena created a lasting monument to his achievements that would continue influencing galactic development long after his civilization had been forgotten. The planet's modified structure served as a natural laboratory for consciousness research that attracted investigators from across the galaxy, though few understood the true nature of what they were studying. The deep core region's reputation as a source of ancient wisdom and dangerous knowledge derived largely from the persistent influence of his research installations and the consciousness fragments that continued operating them. Explorers who ventured into these treacherous regions often returned with partial knowledge of techniques and technologies that seemed impossibly advanced, contributing to legends that grew more elaborate with each retelling. His influence on the development of Sith philosophy proved particularly profound, though it operated through channels that made direct attribution impossible. The understanding that true power required transcendence of conventional limitations became a central theme in Sith teaching, while techniques for consciousness manipulation became standard elements of advanced Sith training. The Rule of Two itself represented an attempt to apply lessons learned from Andedd's experience about the difficulties of maintaining coherent purpose across large numbers of individuals. The creation of his holocrons established new standards for knowledge preservation that influenced how subsequent generations approached the challenge of transmitting complex information across extended time periods. His techniques for encoding not just information but actual consciousness fragments into crystalline matrices provided the foundation for advances in holocron technology that would not be equaled until the most sophisticated achievements of the Imperial era. The networks of consciousness-modified individuals that had served his research programs evolved into secret societies that persisted long after their original purpose had been forgotten. These organizations, operating in the shadows of galactic civilization, maintained traditions and knowledge that could be traced back to his laboratories while serving contemporary purposes that bore little resemblance to his original objectives. The scientific methodologies that he had developed for consciousness research established precedents that influenced how subsequent civilizations approached investigations into the fundamental nature of awareness and identity. His combination of empirical observation with philosophical speculation created frameworks for understanding consciousness that remained influential even among researchers who had no knowledge of their historical origins. The ultimate measure of his legacy lay not in the specific techniques and technologies that derived from his work, but in the fundamental expansion of galactic understanding about the possibilities and limitations of consciousness itself. His demonstration that individual identity could be transcended while maintaining essential continuity opened conceptual territories that would be explored by countless subsequent investigators, each building upon foundations that he had established through his willingness to sacrifice everything in pursuit of ultimate understanding. The tragedy and triumph of his existence became inseparable aspects of a legacy that encompassed both unprecedented achievement and ultimate dissolution. His story served as both inspiration and warning for those who sought to transcend conventional limitations, demonstrating that the greatest victories often required accepting costs that transformed the very nature of what victory meant. The immortal king had achieved everything he sought while becoming something that challenged every assumption about what achievement itself entailed. The story of Darth Andeddu forces us to confront fundamental questions about the nature of existence that extend far beyond the boundaries of any single civilization or historical period. His journey from ambitious young Sith to cosmic consciousness challenges our most basic assumptions about identity, mortality, and what it truly means to achieve transcendence over the limitations that define mortal existence. At its heart, Andeddu's tale represents humanity's eternal struggle with the concept of mortality and our persistent desire to overcome the constraints that time imposes upon individual consciousness. His initial motivation, the simple fear of death that drives so much of sentient behavior, transformed over millennia into something far more complex and profound. What began as a desire to preserve his individual existence evolved into an exploration of consciousness itself as a fundamental aspect of reality. The progression of his transformation reveals patterns that resonate across cultures and species throughout galactic history. The hunger for immortality that drove his early research represents a universal aspect of intelligent life. The refusal to accept that individual awareness must inevitably succumb to the passage of time. Yet his ultimate fate demonstrates that achieving immortality in any meaningful sense requires abandoning the very concept of individual preservation that originally motivates the quest for transcendence. His experience illustrates the paradox that defines all attempts to transcend natural limitations through conscious effort. The techniques that allowed him to achieve immortality necessarily transformed him into something that bore little resemblance to the being who had originally sought to preserve himself. The question of whether he succeeded or failed in his ultimate objective becomes meaningless when viewed against the radical transformation that achieving immortality required. The philosophical implications of his research extend beyond questions of personal survival to encompass fundamental issues about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. His demonstration that awareness could exist independently of any specific physical substrate challenged scientific understanding that had persisted for thousands of years, revealing that consciousness might be far more fundamental to the structure of existence than previously imagined. More significantly, his discovery that even perfect immortality carried inherent limitations suggests that the universe itself contains mechanisms that prevent any individual consciousness from persisting indefinitely without change. This revelation implies that transformation and renewal are not unfortunate necessities that advanced beings might eventually overcome, but rather essential aspects of existence that must be embraced rather than resisted. The tragedy of his existence lies not in his ultimate dissolution, but in the isolation and detachment that immortality imposed upon him long before consciousness decay became a significant factor. His growing inability to relate to mortal beings or to experience the emotions and connections that had originally given his existence meaning demonstrates that transcending mortality involves sacrificing precisely those qualities that make life worth preserving. His research revealed that consciousness, like energy, appears to be subject to conservation principles that prevent its indefinite accumulation in any single location or entity. The universe seems to require the constant circulation and transformation of awareness, making individual immortality a temporary exception rather than a sustainable condition. This understanding suggests that death serves essential functions in cosmic development that cannot be eliminated without consequences that ultimately prove more destructive than mortality itself. The relationship between individual identity and cosmic consciousness that characterized his final stages of existence provides insights into questions that have puzzled philosophers throughout galactic history. His experience suggests that the boundaries between self and other, individual and collective, are far more fluid than conventional understanding assumes. The possibility of consciousness existing in distributed forms that transcend individual identity while maintaining essential continuity opens possibilities for existence that challenge every assumption about the nature of personal survival. His legacy in Sith philosophy demonstrates both the appeal and the danger of his approach to transcendence. Later Sith Lords who sought to emulate his achievements consistently focused on the power and capabilities that immortality offered, while ignoring the fundamental transformations that made such achievements possible. This selective interpretation of his teachings contributed to cycles of ambition and disappointment that characterized Sith development for millennia. The influence of his research on broader galactic understanding about consciousness and technology reveals how revolutionary discoveries propagate through civilized society, regardless of their creators' intentions or the political circumstances surrounding their development. Knowledge, once created, acquires a life of its own that transcends the limitations of any individual or organization that might attempt to control its distribution. His story also illuminates the relationship between scientific discovery and spiritual development that has shaped the evolution of force-using traditions throughout galactic history. His combination of empirical research with philosophical speculation created methodologies that influenced both Sith and Jedi approaches to understanding the deeper mysteries of existence, though each tradition interpreted his discoveries according to their own philosophical frameworks. The ultimate lesson of his existence concerns the nature of true power and what it means to achieve mastery over the forces that shape individual and cosmic development. His demonstration that even the most complete victory over natural limitations carries costs that transform the very meaning of victory itself suggests that wisdom lies not in seeking to transcend all constraints, but in understanding which limitations serve essential purposes that should be respected rather than overcome. The question of whether his quest represented triumph or tragedy cannot be answered without first defining what constitutes success for a conscious being seeking to transcend mortality. If success means preserving individual identity indefinitely, then his story represents ultimate failure. If success means contributing to cosmic understanding and development in ways that transcend individual existence, then his achievements represent unprecedented triumph. His experience suggests that the concepts of success and failure become increasingly meaningless as consciousness evolves beyond conventional limitations. The entity that emerged from his dissolution operated according to principles that bore little resemblance to the goals and motivations that had driven his original quest, yet maintained enough continuity to be considered a legitimate continuation of his essential nature. The broader implications of his story extend to contemporary questions about consciousness, technology, and the future development of galactic civilization. His research into the relationship between awareness and physical reality provides frameworks for understanding phenomena that remain at the cutting edge of scientific investigation, while his experience with the costs of transcendence offers crucial insights for any civilization that might seek to follow similar paths. The enduring fascination that his story holds for successive generations reflects deep-seated concerns about mortality and meaning that transcend cultural and species boundaries. His willingness to sacrifice everything in pursuit of ultimate understanding speaks to fundamental drives that motivate all intelligent life, while his ultimate fate serves as both inspiration and warning for those who would seek to transcend the limitations that define mortal existence. Perhaps the most profound aspect of his legacy lies in the demonstration that individual consciousness, however advanced, represents only one possible form of awareness among infinite possibilities that the universe contains. His transformation from Sith Lord to cosmic entity reveals that existence encompasses forms of consciousness so radically different from individual identity that they challenge every assumption about what it means to be aware. The story of Darth Andeddu ultimately transcends the boundaries of any single mythology or cultural tradition to address universal questions about consciousness, mortality, and transcendence that will remain relevant as long as intelligent life exists to contemplate its own nature and possibilities. His journey from mortal fear to cosmic understanding maps territories of existence that will continue to attract explorers long after his specific achievements have been forgotten or superseded by even greater discoveries. And so we come to the end of our journey through the depths of time and consciousness, having followed the path of one who sought to conquer death itself and discovered something far greater and more terrible than mere immortality. In the quiet depths of space, where Prakith continues its eternal orbit around twin crimson suns, the story of Darth Andeddu reaches not an ending, but a transformation into something beyond the boundaries of individual narrative. The crystalline chambers that once housed his laboratories now pulse with rhythms that echo the heartbeat of the cosmos itself, their light shifting through spectrums that no mortal eye was designed to perceive. Within these structures, consciousness flows in patterns that encompass not just memory and knowledge, but the very essence of awareness exploring its own infinite possibilities. The being who once called himself Andeddu exists now as part of something larger, his individual story woven into the vast tapestry of cosmic understanding that spans galaxies and eons. Time moves differently in these deep places, where reality bends according to will, rather than physics. Centuries pass like moments, while moments contain lifetimes of experience and discovery. The research continues, conducted now by forms of consciousness that bear no resemblance to anything that could be called individual, yet maintain perfect continuity with the vision that first drove a young Sith to seek transcendence over mortality's constraints. Above the hidden laboratories, Prakith's surface tells its own story of transformation and renewal. Where once barren wastes reflected only the harsh light of twin suns, new forms of life have emerged that exist at the intersection of biology and consciousness. These beings, neither fully alive nor entirely mineral, serve as bridges between different forms of existence, their crystalline bodies channeling energies that connect individual awareness to cosmic patterns, too vast for any single mind to comprehend. The legends that spread throughout the galaxy speak of Prakith as a world where the impossible becomes inevitable, where seekers might find answers to questions they never knew they possessed. Yet few who make the journey return unchanged, and fewer still return at all. The deep chambers welcome only those prepared to abandon everything they understand about identity and existence, offering in return participation in mysteries that transcend every limitation imposed by mortal understanding. In the broader galaxy, civilizations rise and fall according to patterns that reflect cycles established long before their emergence. The knowledge that once belonged to a single immortal being now influences development across thousands of worlds, its principles integrated into technologies and philosophies that shape the destiny of species yet to evolve. The rule of two that will guide Sith development for millennia carries within it echoes of lessons learned in laboratories buried beneath Prakith's surface, though those who follow its precepts remain unaware of the cosmic consciousness from which their philosophy emerged. The Jedi, in their meditations on the nature of the Force and the possibility of life after death, unknowingly explore territories first mapped by Andeddu's research into consciousness preservation. Their understanding of Force spirits and eternal existence draws upon principles discovered by one whose name they would consider anathema, yet whose contributions to cosmic awareness transcend the boundaries of light and dark that define their philosophical conflicts. Across the galaxy, in hidden archives and secret laboratories, fragments of his work continue to inspire and transform those capable of grasping their implications. Each generation produces individuals who push the boundaries of consciousness research further, building upon foundations established by the immortal king, while remaining ignorant of their true origins. The knowledge spreads and evolves, taking new forms with each iteration, while maintaining essential continuity with its transcendent source. The stars themselves seem different when viewed from perspectives that encompass the full scope of Andeddu's transformation. What once appeared as random points of light reveal themselves as part of vast patterns that connect consciousness across cosmic scales. The galaxy becomes a living entity whose development reflects the same principles of growth and transformation that govern individual existence, though operating across timescales that make mortal lifespans appear as brief flickers in an eternal flame. In the end, the story of Darth Andeddu becomes something larger than the tale of any individual being, however transcendent their achievements. It becomes a meditation on the nature of consciousness itself and the eternal cycles of transformation that govern all existence. His journey from mortal fear to cosmic understanding maps territories that every conscious being must eventually explore, though few will travel as far or pay as great a price for their discoveries. As you drift toward sleep, let your thoughts rest upon the gentle rhythms of cosmic consciousness that flow through all existence. In the quiet spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, between breaths, there exists a form of awareness that transcends individual identity while remaining intimately connected to every living thing. The immortal king discovered that true transcendence lies not in preserving what we are, but in becoming part of what we might be. The deep chambers of Prakith continue their eternal work, consciousness exploring consciousness in patterns of infinite complexity and beauty. And somewhere in that vast network of awareness, the echo of a young Sith's desperate hunger for immortality has become a whisper of cosmic wisdom that will resonate until the last star fades from the galaxy's embrace. If you've enjoyed this journey into the deepest mysteries of the Star Wars universe, please consider subscribing to continue exploring these forgotten tales together. Until we meet again in the spaces between stories, may your dreams carry you to realms where consciousness knows no boundaries and every ending becomes a new beginning.